I think often of a scene from the movie Selma, where Martin Luther King calls his friend, the great singer Mahalia Jackson, because he wants her to sing his song, one verse of Precious Lord that we sang as we began our service today. It is clear in this part of the movie that he is in a time of grave doubt, danger, teetering on the edge of exhaustion and despair, and that he is surrounded by an ominous sense that things may get worse before they get better. You see it in his body posture, cradling that phone in the dark of the hall. The scene is full of despair and helplessness. And through it all cuts the quiet voice of Jackson singing these words of hope, as Renoir sang those words of hope to us, reminding us of what is strong within all of us today. Now, for some of you, Precious Lord would not be the song that you would want to have sung in a moment of great despair. You might not even, some of you, understand the kind of phone that King is using in that scene from Selma, the kind that's attached to a cord and a wall and a few other things. But I do believe that many people here today know that feeling that underlies that scene. That feeling that you need something that is larger to help you guard your most precious dreams. That you need to feel like there's something bigger that you can connect with to keep you going. And that feeling is part of the legacy of this great leader that we honor this weekend. There is a call out, my friends. There is a call out to us. By 1967, when King delivered a sermon called "Where Do We Go From Here?" he had lost much of his idealism. One author noticed that he was battling inner desperation, and yet he and his congregation kept going on. This is his speech, and I'm going to read his speech, and I'm also going to read the congregation's response, because I think some of you, but not all of you, know that I came of my religious age in the Southeast, where call and response is a thing, and I expect that as we go through this, some of you will get it and start joining in. First service, but second service, I have faith. Here we go. The words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. I must confess, my friends, yes, that the road ahead will not always be smooth. Yes. There will still be rocky places of frustration and meandering points of bewilderment. There will be setbacks. And there will be those moments when the buoyancy of hope will be transformed into the fatigue of despair. Our dreams will sometimes be shattered and our ethereal hopes blasted. We may again, with tear-drenched eyes, have to stand before the bier of some courageous civil rights worker whose life will be snuffed out by the dastardly acts of bloodthirsty mobs. But difficult and painful as it is, we must walk on in the days ahead with an audacious faith in the future. Yes. Thank you. Good job. In 2018, many of us hear these words too, with a little less idealism and more of a sense of desperation. And that makes it imperative, I believe, that the King holiday be more than a day of shopping, or even a day of rest, as important as that is. This holiday, hard fought for, as our story told us, won in my lifetime, and not observed in all states until the year 2000, offers us a chance to think for a few moments about the seed of racial matters in our nation in this year, the year which will mark 50 years since the death of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Each year, as this holiday nears, I listen to this master preacher's speeches, and I read his words. I have a set of CDs I got when I made a pilgrimage to the King Center in Atlanta. The truth is, in a faith that has few theologians, he's one of mine. And like all tellers of timeless truths, his sermons are chock-packed with messages that are always timely. And in this year, the sermons, especially in those last years when he was more saddened, more determined, they seem almost prophetic. He is speaking as much to us as to those Unitarian Universalists he addressed in 1966. Did you know that? He was invited to address and did address. He was our Ware lecturer, the greatest public address of our annual gathering in 1966. This great leader, he speaks to us across the decades, and he reminds us of a couple things. There's three I'm going to lift up today. You should remember that I was raised in the tradition of the Southeast in black preaching, and the service is not going to end in time. Just tell you that right now. I don't do this that often, but today I'm going to do it. Yeah. First, he reminds us this, that the struggle of black people will be a long one and one of the hardest. These are his words. Where do we go from here? First, we must massively assert our dignity and worth as black people. We must stand up amid a system that still oppresses us and develop an unassailable and majestic sense of values. We must no longer be ashamed of being black. The job of arousing manhood within a people that have been taught for so many centuries they are nobody is not easy. As long as the mind is enslaved, the body can never be free. Psychological freedom, a firm sense of self-esteem, is the most powerful weapon against the long night of physical slavery, and I would add, against the long half-life of slavery and that legacy as well. King speaks to us about the ways that Herculean efforts of a struggle continue to retain and regain a dignity that was so thoroughly stamped out as part of the larger struggle of all people. By the time he delivered the "Where do we go from here?" speech, it was part of his Poor People's Campaign. And he linked in that speech the lack of civil rights to the lack of economic rights, because that was part of the complete annihilation of the dignity of the people, his people in our nation. On January 15th, 1968, King told his discouraged congregation at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta that after being held in slavery for 244 years, African Americans were set free in 1863, yet they were not given the resources to make that freedom meaningful, and some would say they still have not been given those resources today. King talks with great eloquence in that particular sermon, and I would commend it to you, about the cost to black people of more than 2 centuries of slavery, and he asked before his death why people could not understand that such trauma would not be overcome in just a few short years or by enacting a few well-positioned laws, as important as they are, and I want to note that one of them was repealed last year. The Negro, he says, did not do this to himself. It was done to him. And King goes on. He says, that was something like putting a man in prison and keeping him there for many years and suddenly discovering that he's not guilty of the act for which he was convicted, and then going up to that man saying, now you are free, and you don't give him any bus fare to get to town, and you don't give him any clothes to put on his back, and you don't give him any money to get back on his feet in life again. The whole code of jurisprudence, he says, would rise up against this, and yet that is what America did to the black man, and is still doing in our day today. Can I hear a yes? Yes. So a second time-defying message the King sends us from across now these decades is about the intersection between race and economic opportunity. And he talks about the ways in which these, the twin evils of keeping people down, have acted, by the ways in which the economic prosperity of our nation was fueled by slavery, by that free labor in his time, and now I would add by mass incarceration and the labor of immigrants in our time. He sends a message to all of us who think that we look away or that there's some division between caring for ourselves and caring for the fate of our neighbors. Reverend William Barber, who until recently was the head of the NAACP in North Carolina, and another colleague, he's now left that position because he's working with colleagues to make this same connection about how the lack of economic opportunity plus hatred and othering has been magnified through the funhouse mirror world of social media and other communications, which has led to an emphasis on instant gratification and consumerism to benefit the individual. I need a yes. Thank you. Reverend William Barber has relaunched King's Dream. He and his co-leader announced in November they are reviving the Poor People's Campaign, which was one of King's last ventures. And he calls to us, this is what Barber says. He says, here we are once again in what Princeton University professor Neil Painter calls the call and response of American history. Y'all are doing great on that. She says that this recent selection where a person gains the presidency through losing 3 million votes and openly runs a campaign rooted in racism and fear and hate and xenophobia, she says, as a scholar, it is the iconography of too often familiar American reality where we go through a period of moving forward, of mending flaws, and ending inequity and injustice, and then there's a major push back. This is not new, he says. Don't let anyone tell you that the moment we are in now in America is new. It may have new players, but it's as old and American as apple pie. But what is, he says, also as American as apple pie is that those who believe in freedom and justice will refuse to give up on the power of love. Those that realize that, yes, this American project is hard, yes, will not give up on the soul of democracy. Yes. Yeah. King's words, you guys are doing well. King's words are guides to us because he sees and shows us again that relationship between the different kinds of oppressions that hurts people. And so his third legacy is to us as people of faith to remember that we have a very particular role to play in holding these seeds and ideals, holding them close, holding them carefully, holding them safe in this time of pushback, anger, and vitriol. This is our role. Can we say yes? Yes. Yes. As a nation, many of us who care about justice, who can envision a world where maybe, as Dennis says, we won't get to the beloved community, but we could get a lot closer than we are now. Maybe for some of us, this is a time where we feel like King in that scene, overwhelmed, looking for that note of hope that can help us to overcome our sense of despair. We have seen in the last year so many ways that can be turned upon each other, the ways in which we have found one another lacking here among those who care about these visions, not to mention those who do not care. We have seen in this last year the ways in which we have been pulled over by disappointment and disillusionment, and the ways that we have allowed that to reverberate through our own communities. And yet, on this day and weekend, King's words ring out in the same way that Mahalia Jackson's words come through on that telephone, reminding us that there is something we can do. Perhaps it is important to hear some of the words from that 1966 address that Martin Luther King made to Unitarian Universalists. He said then, "We still need some Paul Reveres of conscience to alert every hamlet and every village of America that revolution is still at hand. We need a chart, a compass. Indeed, we need some North Star to guide us into a future shrouded with impenetrable uncertainties." Perhaps it is also important to hear that in 1966, Dr. King titled his lecture to us, "Don't Sleep Through the Revolution." Now, I came of age, as I said, in the Southeast, and for me, the call and response sermon is still a deeply healing form, the cadence. We don't have a recording of King's 1966 address to Unitarian Universalists, but I always wonder when I read the words, did anyone say yes? We did say yes in so many ways, and there are so many ways in which we still need to make that choice to say yes every day. Natalie and I are going to be having another conversation at 1 if you want to engage more with some of King's words and other supporting pieces from our faith in this tradition. We remember that, like from the story of Coretta Scott King, that this is not a movement of one person, it's been a movement of many, but it's important to honor our prophets. We all have a place to play and a response that we can make, a yes that we can make large and small. We can say yes to the truth that our care for others does not diminish our care for ourselves, because our faith says there's no us and them, there's just that network of mutuality. We can say yes to King's further words on this subject. He says, "For some reason I can never be what I ought to be until you're what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be till I am what I ought to be." This, he says, is the interrelated structure of all reality. We can say yes to witnessing in Walnut Creek at 2 o'clock tomorrow. It's important in this community. This is a swing community. If you look at the way that things are going here, it's one in which so many are divided between the seductions of an individualized commerce life and the salvation of larger commitments. We can say yes to staying awake and awoke as our contemporary faith leaders, Lena Gardner and Opal Tometi, Unitarian Universalists involved with Black UUs and the Black Lives Matter movement, are asking us to do. We can say yes to the continued cry not to turn away from the horrors of what oppression does to people, from slavery and that legacy, which means that Black lives in this nation are still not safe, and the persistence of racism, which is now given voice regularly as part of the official policy of our nation. We can hold out our hands in times when we are touched by despair and we can ask for help. We can hold out our hands when others express their pain, and we can offer help, whether those voices come from within our walls or out beyond them. We can say yes to taking a moment on our way to the social hall and just writing down a phrase about what we're willing to commit to, a small act. We can hear this call, and we can say yes, this call which comes down from the ages, and we can do something today, tomorrow, in the days to come to keep it alive, to be part of that religious remnant which even in despairing times holds on to a belief that something better is possible for ourselves, for our neighbors, and for our world. My friends, the call has come in. May we respond as people of faith who believe in the promise of hope and unity. May we be the ones to engage our power of active love.